Hello and welcome to this session today. My name is Cindy Haight, and we have Sabrina Ippolito here to talk about this wonderful topic and this very important topic of common nonconformances and root cause analysis, because we all know how important our internal audits are, and this topic is really going to help you guys out. We're so happy that you're here today. My name is Cindy Haight. I work for the sales division in the knowledge division. I work for the certifications. I can help our customers with standard ISO 9000, ISO 14001, different kinds of standards like that that kind of fall in the manufacturing and industrial, and then branches off into the sustainability as well as the medical device realm. I've been with the company, it says a year, but it's actually, I'm encroaching on my second year anniversary. I do have over 20 years of experience in the TIC industry, and I'm so happy to be here with you. This is our fourth free session in our QMS webinar series. And I'd like to introduce you to your speaker. If you've not attended one of our sessions, you're in for a treat today. We have Ms. Sabrina Ippolito. She is one of our lead auditors and lead trainers here at SGS and SGS Academy. She's a classically trained biochemist, certified lead auditor, and she's helped many, many companies and organizations work through and achieve their quality goals and objectives. She lives in Canada. She is an affiliate of the Chemists of Quebec, as well as the American Society for Quality.
Yes.
There's just a little bit about SGS. I don't want to waste too much time because I do want to focus on the content. But SGS is a great company. We are the #1 world leader in the TIC industry. That's testing, inspection, and certification. You can see we have a very large company that's spread across the globe. And we are approaching our 150th anniversary of being in business. So I'm expecting a good party here in a couple of years when we celebrate that. Our Knowledge Solutions division offers the services that you can see here. Obviously, the certification and training. We have a full training website and roster of available public training courses. They're also available for private instruction if you have a group to train on a variety of topics. Too many to list, but many are focused on ISO 9001. We offer customized audit services. We have an excellent supply chain risk management service called Transparency One, and we also offer some technical consulting. The SGS solutions, this is what helps us to stand out from the rest of the companies in our industry. We have the expertise, we have the global network. We're in all 130 countries, no, 80 countries, okay. And we believe in the quality of our service. We want to be an end-to-end partner. We partner with our customers so that we are making sure that you are doing the very best you can. And we're so happy to have you guys here. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Sabrina. And please remember, we do have a Q&A area. So if you have questions throughout the programming, you can post your questions there. You will receive a copy of the slides at the end of the session. You will receive an email. And then we'll also be sending you a link to the on-demand session once it's posted to our website. Okay, so enjoy the session. Take it away, Sabrina.
Thank you so much, Cindy. You always give such warm welcomes every time you're introducing the webinar. So I want to extend, just like Cindy did, a very warm welcome to everybody. Welcome to this learning event. I'm so thrilled and happy to be here because I am going to be discussing with you nonconformances. What better discussion to have on a Friday afternoon? So today's training, today's learning event is broken up into two parts. Part one, we're going to be looking at some common nonconformances. And the second part, we're going to be looking at root cause analysis. If you were part of one of our training sessions in the past, you'll notice that there are some similarities in this presentation as there were in the previous presentation. So what some of the things that we're going to be looking at in part one is really what's changed from the 2008 version of the standard to the 2015 version of the standard, and why has it become such a popular standard. In addition, we're going to be defining nonconformances and looking at some of their classifications. For instance, with the ISO 9001, the classifications are majors and minors. But we'll go a little bit more into that as we're going through the training. We're going to be looking at some sources of requirements and what we actually mean by that key operative word, requirement. In addition, there's a brief overview of common nonconformances, which I think will shed light on and hopefully comfort you as well, knowing that you're not the only ones in that boat, that if you happen to be receiving nonconformances on a specific clause, just understand you're not the only ones that are trying to fight that battle. And how to document a nonconformance. And as an auditor, I can honestly say this happens to be the caveat, and it happens to be the pain point of most organizations. So I'll give you some pointers on what to do, what to watch out for, how you can better navigate that terrain. Part two, which is root cause analysis, we're going to do a very brief overview of root cause analysis, how to perform an RCA, and the interested parties that are involved within the activity. And in addition, we're going to be looking at some examples of tools that can be used. We will end off with questions and answers. Hopefully, I'll be able to provide you with a more longer bandwidth of time for those questions and answers, as I'm sure you have plenty that you'd like to ask and have answered. So without further ado, let's start. So what's really changed? Well, in 2015 version, so the 2015 version of the standard, there has been, or rather there is an improvement in customer focus. In addition, we are enhancing leadership involvement. So we know, as you are aware, change is very difficult within the organization. It's even more difficult when you do not have the backing of leadership. So what we're wanting to see here, especially as an auditor, I want to see, or we want to see, that we actually have the backing of leadership that is pushing, directing, and navigating the project for either implementing or keeping with the requirements of the ISO 9001. In addition, there's improvement engagement of people. This is one area that I've seen many organizations in terms of continuous improvement. When they are conducting internal audits, they're constantly going to the SMEs, to the subject matter experts, to pull from them what are some of the issues, what are the risks that they're seeing on a daily, so that these issues and these risks can be addressed. Adopting a process-based approach. One of the best improvements, in my opinion, because we're not just trying to address the clause. I've mentioned this in the past. If you think about a process-based approach within your organization, and you start off with how product comes into the company and how it travels. So this could be either from raw material or whatever have you, but how it comes in and how it travels through all of the different steps. We have a much better chance, probability, of meeting all of the requirements of the standard, because you're looking at it from the perspective it's more organic, it's more linear. So using the process-based approach, in my opinion, has significantly helped organizations. Even organizations better understand how to meet the requirements of the standard. In addition, we have enable people and process improvement, facilitate evidence-based decision-making. This is also another biggie, because what it helps us do is it helps us pull reasoning, justification for our actions, for what we're doing and why we're doing it. So instead of just doing something because the standard or a clause in the standard requires us to do it, we're basing it off evidence. We're justifying why we're doing what we're doing. We have assure relationship management, establish a systemic approach to risk management. Now, I'm going to just stop us a little bit over here. This is worth mentioning. So the standard, and I'm repeating this again, this is from a previous training I had given, but the standard does not require us to formalize risk management. I'm saying, as an auditor, as a consultant, as a trainer, it is easier when you formalize it and when you quantify it. Because as you know, risk cannot always be eliminated. At the very least, risk can be managed, can be mitigated, and therefore reduced. So while you can use qualitative adjectives, words, you are in a better position to quantify it, to show that, hey, you know, we might still be a high risk, but we've gone from a 25 to a 15. So clearly what we've put in place did not eliminate the risk, but it certainly helped reduce the risk. And this is what we're looking for, because that in itself is an improvement to your quality system. Managing third-party risks. So this is also involved when we're doing our, when we're identifying who are our interested parties, what are their needs, their wants, their concerns, what is it that they expect of us in terms of a service or in terms of a product. So based off of this, we can better manage our systems and design our internal systems to meet their requirements, their demands, their wants. And we all know that a happy customer is a returning customer. And finally, enable knowledge management. So how do we get information across? How do we ensure that information gathered is making its way to all pertinent individuals? And not that we are just stuffing everybody's brain with information that may or may not be necessary, especially if it's not necessary. Don't pick up valuable brain space. So these are just some common things that have changed from the 2008 versus the 2015 version of the standard. In addition, there has been change in terminology. I'm sure you've known at some point we used to speak about the quality representative. Now we no longer speak about quality representative. Instead, we speak about the leadership committee, so that the burden of quality does not just rest on the shoulders of one person. I often tell everybody that quality is not the responsibility of only and solely the individual that has the word quality in their job title. But in reality, it's the responsibility of every single individual within that organization or that's indirectly impacted to that organization. So that, in my opinion, was one of the nicer improvements that they've made. I'm sure you've heard of the words exclusions. Exclusions is no longer part of the lingo, is no longer part of the terminology. Now we talk about non-applicables. I'm sure you've all heard of CAPAs. Albeit that the word CAPA is still used, I've noticed that many organizations, many companies are starting to use CACI, which is corrective action continuous improvement. So they remove the preventive action because it is being managed through risk. So this is to say organizations are still using CAPA, but they're also putting a twist to it. They're being a little bit creative, so they can also use CACI. And as long as they indicate that the preventive action, we can still use the terminology within the company. But as long as you're showing that the preventive action aspect has been replaced by risk, generally speaking, you're good to go. So what's a nonconformity? Well, based on ISO 9000, which is our dictionary, nonconformity is a non-fulfillment of a requirement. So let's unpack this a little bit. What does this actually mean? Well, we have a requirement. So where do we get these requirements? What are sources of these requirements? We have legislative. So we have anything that's law related, Health Canada, FDA requirements. Secondly, we have requirements that are based on certification, such as ISO 9001, 14001, 45001, any certification type. Then we look at our customers, our agreements with our customers. What are the requirements that we need to meet because our customers require that. And finally, we have internal requirements. So these are traditional SOPs and work instructions, our forms, our records, everything that makes up our documented system within the company. Okay? So we have a requirement. Through internal audits or even during day-to-day operations, we notice that we fail to meet a requirement. And we have evidence and we have proof of that failure. Then and only then can we say that we have a non-conformity. We cannot base a non-conformity on, well, in a previous organization where I used to work, because the thing is, every company runs their company slightly different, even if you're within the same industry. So you have to really think about what is it that you're looking at, what is that issue, that event that's been presented, and analyze it. Is it breaking any rules in terms of regulatory? Does it break any rules in terms of certification? Does it break any rules in terms of our clients and us meeting their requirements? Or does it break any of our internal rules? You need to be able to specify exactly what it is that we are non-conforming to. So these are some examples of sources of requirements. I just briefly went over them in the previous slide, but this is definitely worth keeping as a slide, as a little memo. Keep it on your desktop, keep it on your on a pad of paper or something, and constantly ask yourself these questions. Well, whenever we're talking about non-conformances, am I breaking any rules with regards to statutory or legislative requirements? System standards, customer contracts, agreements that are in place. And then finally, everything that is system-based within your company. Okay, first pop quiz. Think about your previous ISO 9001 external audits. How many non-conformances would you say your organization receives on average? I'll give you a couple of seconds for that. Okay, we're sitting at about 43%. Let's bring it up. %51, 53. Wait a little bit longer. (62, 63%). On average, you don't have to tell me, you don't have any calculations to do per se, just more or less. Okay, let's see. 1 to 2. All righty. Okay, so we've got the majority of the callers today range between 1 to 2, which is, it's fine. 3 to 4, more than 4. Okay, that's good. That's very nice. Okay, so let's see where some of these common non-conformances come from. So I managed to get some of my colleagues to help me out and just to pull some data and to identify where we typically would see these non-conformances throughout the standard, and this is what we found. So it'd be interesting to see if you align with what we have pulled in terms of data. So distribution of findings overview. So we have, which is pretty much a tie. Nonconformances generally are found in clause 7 and in clause 8. So clause 8 takes the cake though, with a 56.3%. Close third is also performance evaluation. And one of the things, and this is something I really need to point out to you because it's two sections where I typically see individuals struggling with, especially in section 9. Okay, when you are performing an internal audit can be done by an external source as well. You can hire a consultant to do an internal audit for you. You just have to make sure that they meet the requirements and that they are lead auditors and that they can actually do the job, right? Okay. If you've decided that internal audits will be done entirely by individuals within your company, that's fine. But you need a team of at least 2. And the reason for it is because you want to exercise impartiality. So therefore, if you're going to take someone from quality, that's fine. But quality cannot audit quality. They can audit everything else, but they cannot audit quality. That's to say you would need to also train and make sure that that individual is competent to conduct those internal audits as well from a different department, whether it's production, whether it's sales, whether it's HR, wherever else. Naturally, I'm very conservative and I like a backup. So I always make sure I have at least a team of 3 so that I can actually carry out the non-conformances, not the non-conformances, I can actually carry out the internal audit, knowing that I have people that I can rely on. Okay, so please keep that in mind. In addition, we have issues also in performance evaluation because of management reviews. So an internal audit is done, then it's the management review. If you are already certified to ISO 9001, you are not required to do a full system audit. You can do a partial audit and that's equally okay. As long as you audit everything that's quality related. So that's the only little thing. Make sure that quality and everything within quality does get audited, but it can be partial. When it comes to management reviews, we have inputs and we have outputs. You need to address everything that's on the input section and everything that's in the output section. You would be surprised how many individuals will create this wonderful PowerPoint presentation, use their own verbiage, their own terminology, and so on and so forth, but they're still missing elements from the input and the output. A management review is not just what you feel like discussing. A management review requires you to put in all of the information that's listed in input and output and make it explicit and discuss those points, each and every single one of those points. So I just wanted to outline that a little bit more. We did say, however, so we're going to do just a deep dive, very, very quick, very casual on section 8, being that section 8 takes the cake with a whopping 56.3% of nonconformances. So what does that actually look like? Well, when we further unpack this, section 8.5, which is the production of service provisions, is typically where most individuals will get nonconformances, followed by a very close second, section 8.4. So this is the trend that we've been observing, and this runs from 2022. It just made sense for me to grab an entire year, so I had from 2022 January up to December inclusive. In addition, how do we document a nonconformance? Well, as I mentioned before, we have a nonconformity statement. So what is it that you saw, that you evaluated, that you reviewed that is not correct, that's non-conforming? Was it a section in a standard, in a legislative standard, or in a certification standard? As an example, you're supposed to conduct internal audits at minimum once a year and you haven't done it. In that case, that is a nonconformance. What's the evidence? The evidence is a lack of a report in this case. And what is the reference? So you need to actually reference that nonconformance to say, this actually comes from somewhere, not just something that I wish that we had and we don't have. So this actually comes from a section in the standard, and it can even come from a section in your management system, in your SOPs, in your work instructions that say internal audits are being conducted on a minimum of annually following whatever schedule's in place. So in this case, you're making reference to a standard, and you're making reference to your own internal documentation as well, because that documentation internally is based off of a standard. So the fact that an internal audit, as an example, was not conducted that year, you end up earning yourself a non-conformance. So remember, you have a non-conformance statement, you have the evidence that supports what you saw or did not see and should have seen, and then you have to back it up with evidence. You have to back it up with a reference. So let's classify some of these non-conformances. We have under 9001, we have two classifications. We have major versus minor. A major nonconformance is a systemic breakdown of your management system. So for instance, if I were auditing production and I see that documentation is not adequately being filled out, or that they're working off of outdated forms and records, that would be a nonconformance. If I then go to, let's say, quality, and I happen to be auditing some documentation in nonconformances or corrective actions, and I see that they are inaccurately or not properly well documented, then I'm starting to see a more systemic issue. So in this case, I noticed that the issue is based on documentation, that the documentation practices are not adequately being carried out. So in this case, section 7.5 of the standard is in question. So you end up inheriting, unfortunately, a major nonconformance. But we can also get a major nonconformance whenever there's a shall, such as an internal audit that has not been completed, or management review that has not been conducted for that year. This is something that has to be done. It must be done. It shall be done. So if you haven't done it, it is a major nonconformance. A number of small minors that you're gathering throughout your internal audit or even within an external audit will also result in a major nonconformance. And in addition, it's any issue that's related to high risk. So these four areas, these 4 points can result in a major nonconformance. For minor nonconformances, however, these are isolated issues. So this does not indicate a breakdown of a system. This only happens to be, say, a one-off. Awesome. So here, I bring you now to another topic, another little area, which I feel is super important, because I feel that these are two words, conformance and compliance, that are used interchangeably within companies. Please do not use them interchangeably. They have a very different impact, okay? So when we talk about conformance, the word conformance generally relates to not meeting or meeting the requirement of a standard. So certification, ISO 9001, 14001, 45001, 22716, 15378, so on and so forth. We use the word conformance also whenever we're speaking about meeting the requirement of a client. And we use the word conformance when we're talking about meeting the requirement of our quality system. Non-conformance is just not meeting those requirements of a standard, certification, customer requirement, and our internal requirements. The word compliance is more severe, and we use that word compliance whenever we're talking about meeting the requirement of something that's legislative, or non-compliance, not meeting the requirement of something that's legislative. As an example, you have a non-compliance because you needed to carry out an activity as it's written under Health Canada requirements and it wasn't done. So these are two words, often enough are used interchangeably within organizations, but they should not be. So it's important that you do understand the difference between the two of them. So we're going to play a nice little game. Why not? So we're going to decide if each scenario conforms to ISO 9001:2015 requirements. We're going to start. They're all based on poll questions. The auditor observes an operator using a caliper to remove some shaving of the metal part coming out of the machine. When questioned about that, he said not to worry because the caliper was calibrated, and he showed the sticker with a valid date. The auditor retrieved the record of calibration and saw that the calibration frequency was defined as every 2 years. Is this a nonconformity, yes or no? So is scenario number 1 conforming or non-conforming? Good, we're at 52%. Let's see, 55. Come on, bring those numbers up. 58. Give you a couple more minutes. No, a couple more seconds, not minutes. My minutes are counted. We're sitting at 60% of attendees answered, 61. Okay, let's see. Oof. Oh my gosh, this is almost an equal split. So yes, it is a non-conformance. It's non-conforming to the requirement. You can't use a caliper. A caliper is a tool. It's an equipment that's used for measuring. You can't use it to just shave off some metal pieces from a piece that's been machined by an equipment. You have to use the piece of equipment, the caliper, for what it is meant for it to be used for, which is measuring. So the thing is, if I use it to shave off some metal pieces, that's not the intended use for the caliper. You can actually render it uncalibrated. So then you have a tool that's being used, but it's improperly being used. So in this question, is this a non-conformance? The answer is yes, it is non-conforming. And if an auditor were to see that, even an internal auditor, this would require you to raise a non-conformance. Okay, next scenario. A tape measure is used to rough measure the approximate distance between cutters. So a tape measure is what we typically see in construction, okay? So a tape measure is used to rough measure the approximate distance between cutters in the saw cutting area. The tape measure is not used to measure any product, only to set up the cutters. Using the 9001:2015 version of the standard, must this tape measure be calibrated? Yes or no? So do we have to calibrate that tape measure? Okay, let's see what you've answered. No, you're absolutely right. You don't have to, because you're using it to rough measure. If you know that you want to keep like a 2 meter distance or a 4 meter distance, whatever the requirement, not even requirement, but whatever is needed to make sure that you can actually perform your activity, you can just rough measure it with a non-calibrated measuring tape. But if you want to be uniform within the company, you want to be consistent with all of your equipment, including a tape measure, then this is a decision that you would take to say that, yes, we are going to go ahead and calibrate it. But for all intents and purpose, under ISO 9001, there's no requirement. So you do not have to worry about calibrating a tape measure in this scenario, in this situation. So is it a non-conformance? No, it is not a non-conformance. So bravo. Good. Let's look at the third one. The auditor complained that the gauges were identified only with the serial number and not a sticker indicating expiry dates for calibration. The gauges are, however, traceable. They are traceable to a certificate of calibration. Did the auditor find a nonconformity according to ISO 9001? So here I'm questioning the sticker. Do I need to have a sticker in this case? Sitting at 55%. Let's get in a couple more answers. $63. No, it's not a nonconformance. You're exactly right. It's not, because I can trace it. So if there's a serial number on an equipment and the certificate of calibrations or the certificate of calibration equally has identified on that certificate the serial number, as long as I can trace that piece of equipment with the certificate, I'm good. I'm good to go. There's no nonconformance because there is traceability. Bravo. Good. Scenario 4. The management review process was reviewed during the audit and the following was noted. There is no evidence that the following areas were reviewed during the management review: status of the product regulatory compliance, previous management review results, monitoring and measuring results, and the results of internal audits. Is this a nonconformance? Tim, just because you brought, I just see your question. If SOP states the calibration sticker is required, okay, if your internal procedure says that you need to have a sticker, then it's a non-conformance because it comes from your internal procedure. Remember that list of 4 where we're talking about regulatory requirement, certification requirement, customer requirement, internal requirement. In this case, it's an internal requirement that's not fulfilled, and I can address it to a section in an SOP, then yes, it's a non-conformance. But according to 9001, if I base myself only on the standard, it's not, because I can trace it. Okay. So yes, absolutely. This was 100% a non-conformance. Now I want you to remember this one because I'm going to take you through root cause analysis with this specific example. So very good. This is a non-conformance. Pass, go, collect 200. You did fantastic. Bravo. Okay. So the next topic is part 2, where we're looking at root cause analysis. So when we talk about root cause analysis, what is it exactly? Well, root cause analysis is used to determine why, like really at the roots of that nonconformity and why that nonconformity is occurring. Most root cause analysis conducted by organizations are flawed. Only looking at superficial reasons such as human error, apathy. Another section was responsible. This is a head office issue. Someone made me do it. So I want you to understand that 90%, at minimum, 90% of nonconformances are actually management system deficiencies. Saying it's human error, human error, human error, human error. As an auditor, we dig. And often enough, we find out it's not human error. So there are so many tools that you can use when it comes to root cause analysis. And honestly, what I generally tell people is that people are coming in, people that work at organizations come from all walks of life. So there are engineers, like I know my brother who is an engineer, he is fabulous at conducting an FMEA, but that's a him thing. My daughter, who's 3 years old, she's fabulous at conducting the 5 whys analysis. She's always asking why. She's also at that age. You know, so it is, what I generally tell people is that if you want people to be autonomous and to help you with finding out, you know, issues in terms of why there are problematic areas in that are occurring, or why you have nonconformities, and therefore you are wanting them to conduct a root cause analysis, there's a plethora of tools that you can use, and some of them include the causal factor tree analysis, the Fishbone Diagram, which happens to be one of my favorite ones because it really allows me to call in people from different areas. There's change analysis, another very popular one. The 5 whys, which is another one of my personal favorites. There's risk tree, parent analysis, fault tree analysis, and obviously others as well. I generally tell people the expectation is that you get to the root. How you get there, using whatever method, leave it open for people to decide, because this way they can probably get to that answer far better than if you're just telling them you have to use one method and it happens to be a method that they're not familiar on how to use. So Fishbone diagram looks something like this, where we consider measurement, methods, machine, we consider materials, people, and environment, and we bring in all subject matter experts in each one of these areas. Like I had mentioned before, another one of my favorites, and also my daughter's, is the 5 whys. So I had a situation that occurred to me a few years ago when I was doing an audit, and we're going to use Bob as an example. Bob was just weeks away before starting his retirement. He does what he normally does every single day, walks into the workshop, slips on some oil on a little oil patch, injures his knee, and now he's out of commission for the next 2 months. So the woman who was dealing with that event, with that investigation, she said it was human error, that the individual just did not know how to walk through the warehouse or the workshop and should have avoided that oil patch. So when I looked at this, I kind of laughed. I said, well, what did you do to address the situation? And the answer was, well, I showed them how to walk through the warehouse and how to not step over oil. And I looked at her, I said, you realize this is a man who's old enough to be your father. And so she kind of laughed it off and she says, yes, I realize that. I said, so let me show you how we actually do that root cause analysis. Why is there oil there? Because that machine is relatively really new. And she says, I don't know. I said, good. So call in the person who's responsible for the maintenance of machines. As we went through the 5 why analysis, it was determined that there is no process in place for the onboarding of new equipment because the individual who was responsible for maintenance hadn't done maintenance on the machine since it was brought in 2 years before. So that's the actual root of the situation of the nonconformity. And it's important that we take that approach. It's important that we do and that we show and that we're taking our best effort and that we follow up to see, like, is what we've put in place actually decreasing the number of nonconformances, or is there no change? And generally speaking, if there's no change, it means that you haven't yet got to the root. And there's no problem. There's no problem with going back to the drawing board and asking new minds and new individuals to help you through that root cause analysis. So just keep that in mind. Here we have a typical form that could be used for root cause analysis. This is one, generally speaking, when I consult with people, I generally show people more or less like what are the necessary components in a root cause analysis. So you can have something that looks like this. In this particular example, if you look at section 3, where we're looking at the root cause, I'm saying you can do whatever you want. You want to do the 5 whys, use the 5 whys. You prefer the fishbone diagram, use that one. You want to use a FMEA or a different method, use what method is going to allow you to get to the root cause. That's going to allow you to be able to identify what really caused that non-conformity. So let's consider scenario number 4. Do you remember scenario number 4 with the management review? So originally I mentioned you have the nonconformity statement. So this is stating the finding in relation to the management system. Then you have the evidence, which is stating the evidence that supports the finding. So in this case, we support the finding by saying, well, we looked at the management review, but there's these areas that are missing. Finally, the reference. We are referencing, in this case, the standard, can also be, as an example, our internal requirements. Most people, some people, what they'll do is that they will take the requirements of the standard and put it into their own SOPs. So the management review process was reviewed during the audit, and the following was noted. There is no evidence that the following areas were reviewed during management review: the status of the product regulatory compliance, previous management review results, monitoring and measuring results, and results of internal audits. These aspects, these 4 areas, were missing from the management review. So consider this. Okay? Now we're doing root cause analysis. So the nonconformity statement is the management review process is ineffective. The evidence, what did I look at? No evidence that the following was reviewed during the management review: the status of product regulatory compliance, previous management review results, monitoring and measuring results, and results of internal audits. Those 4 areas. The reference, section 9.3 of the standard, 9001, and referencing of internal procedure. So if you actually have an SOP within your organization that references the inputs that are required in a management review, then you would also include that in terms of the reference. Pay attention to the root cause. Management reviews are being conducted with no agenda because the person setting reviews was not aware of the 9001 requirements for management review. The corrective action taken, think about the corrective action and relate it back to everything that we just saw here, specifically the root cause. A proper agenda for management review was developed and will be used from now on. Is the issue raised effectively addressed? So essentially, is the corrective action that's taken, is that addressing the non-conformance and the root cause? That's the question. Yes or no? We're sitting at 40%. Let's bring it up a little bit more. 47, 50, 55, 57, 59, 61, 60. Okay. That's correct. It's not. So let's go back. The reason it's not, look at the root cause. We're going to break it down. Okay. Management reviews are being conducted with no agenda because the person setting the reviews was not aware of the requirements. So the question is, in terms of leadership, because one of the responsibilities of leadership is ensuring that the person who's going to be taking over, who's going to be carrying out an activity, is competent. So the thing is, that individual who was doing the ISO, who was doing the management review, didn't know what those requirements were. So we have a problem there. That's not being addressed in the corrective action. So training is not being addressed in the corrective action. Competency is not being addressed in the corrective action. That's fine that you are fixing the problem by saying that there's going to be a proper agenda, but you're not addressing all of the elements that are suggested in the root cause. And this is something that many organizations struggle with. So be careful about that. Even if you're in quality and you start sending non-conformance corrective actions to your colleagues, and then they're supposed to reply back with a root cause analysis, look at what the non-conformances, look at the reference, look at the evidence. You need to fix that. That's fixing the non-conformity, yeah. But you also have the responsibility of addressing everything in the root cause, not just the non-conformity. So in this case, what would have made this accurate would have been a process in place for identifying whether or not the individual has background knowledge is competent in a training or when being provided a task. So there's that aspect. And then if not, to be given the training so that they can carry out their duties. That aspect is not being covered in the corrective action. So therefore, this is not satisfactory. And it wouldn't pass even with an external auditor. Good. So how do we evaluate effectiveness? First, you want to review the nonconformity description. You want to review the root cause. Are you adequately addressing everything in the root cause? You want to ensure that the corrective action proposed addresses the problem in the root cause and verify that the corrective action is in fact being implemented. And this requires a waiting period. And the waiting period, don't be funny, it's not 24 hours. Wait it out. Wait it out. Wait 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. The next audit, internal audit, there has to be a waiting period for you to be able to gather information and evidence to say that yes, what we put in place works, or no, what we put in place does not seem to work. We need to go back to the drawing board. And there is nothing wrong with going back to the drawing board. It's fine to go back to the drawing board. As long as what we're seeing is that these corrective actions, non-conformances, are not falling in between cracks, that you're actually doing something about it, and document, take credit for the work that's being done. If you've done a follow-up, look, and you've reviewed evidence, document it. It doesn't have to be a dissertation. One liner is more than sufficient. Lastly, you want to verify that the corrective action has prevented the nonconformity. And like I said, this is going to require a waiting period. Generally speaking, waiting 24 hours is not sufficient to be able to gather this evidence. Good. Cindy, I leave it to you.
That was awesome. Thank you so much for all of that information. We all learned a lot, I'm hoping, and I hope everyone enjoyed participating in the poll questions. That is fun to have that little interaction going on. You can see there's this slide is just kind of giving you an overview of some of the training opportunities that we have available for you. And you can scan that QR code and reach our website. You can see we do have 3 more public training sessions for ISO 9001 scheduled throughout the rest of this year. And we have 2 more opportunities for the IRCA lead auditor. That's the highest level of training. So if you have experience or are looking to become a certified lead auditor, you can contact us through the website to register at any time. I want to say thank you very much. It's been great having you guys here. It's been a pleasure. We have another session coming up. It will be the 5th session. It's the client's certification journey. That's coming up on October 6th. And then we're going to have a wrap-up session in January. We're going to find some really good questions that you guys have asked throughout the series, and we're going to have a good discussion about those questions. So again, thank you so much. Please participate in this survey. You'll be receiving an email with a copy of the slides. And I hope you guys have a great day. Do we have time for a couple of questions, Sabrina?
I think so, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Ah, geez. Okay. Let me see if I can pick a good one. So many great questions. Oof.
I know.
Okay, here's one. What's the difference between a nonconformance and a process or procedure deviation?
Ooh.
Is there a difference?
Okay, so deviations, you can have 2 types of deviations. They can either be planned or unplanned. So with a planned deviation, this generally speaking is not a nonconformance as long as you are documenting what that deviation is. And obviously quality needs to be aware of it because they will determine the impact to quality. An unplanned deviation is something that happens, which obviously is not planned. So if this is, as an example, if you're following a recipe or you have to manufacture a piece and you should have, let's go with recipes. And you needed to do, in your recipe, you had to make something boil for 40 minutes, but yet you let it boil for 15 minutes. Or you let it boil for an hour and a half. You're deviating from the procedure. In that case, that's a nonconformance. So what you're going to have to do is determine what is the impact of that event on the quality of product in this case. So a deviation can be a nonconformance if it's not planned, but it can also be a way of tracking something that is planned. So do you need to have it as part of your ISO? Only you can determine that, because I don't know your industry. I don't know what you manufacture, what you make. And if that is something that you judge necessary, then yes, it should be part of your quality management system. Otherwise, no. That's a good one. We typically see that in food and in pharma cosmetics deviations.
Okay, here's a question. And you can speak to this as one of our excellent trainers. What's the difference between internal and lead auditor training?
Lead auditor training allows you to carry out audits like a third-party audit through a certification body like SGS. So that would generally be the fourth training day. So fundamentals course is 2 days, followed by internal audit training, followed by lead auditor. Lead auditor is more formalized, if you will, than an internal audit. Internal audit is usually on the third day, where you receive an internal audit training, go through the workshops and the directions with your trainer. And that generally gives you enough knowledge for you to conduct internal audits within your company, and even some supplier audits if you so wish to do so. Some organizations, in order for you to be an internal auditor, will require you to have lead auditor status. So essentially, the lead auditor is more formalized and is more based on, it's if you're looking to change careers or professions and do, let's say, what I do professionally, which is going to audit for certification bureaus such as SGS. Plethora of standards such as 9001, 14,001, 45,001. So you can have lead auditor status for a variety of standards. I hope that answered your question. Next.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes.
Can non-conformance be open for a year as long as it's closed before the internal audit?
Yes, and before, and it has to be closed before your external audit if you're being certified, if you're part of a certification scheme. Because if it is not closed, so let's say you get a minor, let's say your external auditor gives you a minor on a finding. If that non-conformance is not closed, that then becomes a major on your next audit. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, I see a question from Benjamin, and you say you work with ISO 13485. Do you offer failure investigation and root cause analysis training, either on-site or virtual? Benjamin, you can see our email addresses on that slide. If you want to shoot me an email, I can talk to you about that offline, and the answer is yes. And let's see, do we have time for one more?
Yeah.
One more? Okay. Regarding calibration, doesn't the person using the instrument need to know if the calibration is current? There would be ways to do this other than using a sticker, but in the absence of another method used to communicate calibration status, is this an NCR?
I don't understand the question. Okay, so so generally speaking, when there's a piece of equipment, okay, if I understand the question correctly, if your piece of equipment is out of tolerance, or let's say a caliper was dropped, so you're like, well, I'm questioning now the integrity of this equipment for it to actually read the proper numbers, then in this case you would take it out of inventory, and that is usually traced and tracked on an asset log. When the equipment is slightly bigger than a caliper, let's say, you would normally put a label, do not use out of calibration or something like that. If you're using it, it's a non-conformance, because you shouldn't be using it. It's in question. So in this case, it does have an impact to quality. One of the major questions you should be asking yourself is, does this impact quality? Quality of the product, quality of the service. I hope I answered your question, if I understood your question properly. If not, my email is there. Feel free to ask me any questions.
I think that we're going to have to wrap it up. We're a few minutes over. We want to be respectful of your time.
Yes.
Thank you again for being here. Please do answer our survey. We really appreciate your feedback into, the content and the platform even, so we can always make things better for you next time. Feel free to visit us on social media. You can see our website is there, and we'll send you information so you can join us next month for the client's certification journey session. Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you. Have fun.